2026 could be the year millions of Americans finally see a $2,000 stimulus check hit their accounts. Lawmakers and the administration have hinted at major distributions, fueling questions about who qualifies, when it will arrive, and how it will be delivered. In this video, we break down the latest updates, analyze the timing, and explore what this could mean for middle and low income households nationwide. Get ready to understand the potential impact and what to watch for in the months ahead. The discussion surrounding a proposed $2,000 stimulus payment in 2026 reflects a strategic shift away from broad, universal relief programs toward a more targeted form of financial support. Unlike earlier stimulus efforts that were distributed widely across the population, this proposal is being framed as a focused intervention aimed at households facing the greatest financial pressure. This distinction is central to understanding both the intent and the structure of the plan. At the core of the proposal is an income-based eligibility model. Policymakers are signaling that low and middle-income households would be the primary recipients, while higher earners would likely be excluded through defined income thresholds. This approach is rooted in economic efficiency. Households within these income brackets are statistically more likely to spend additional funds quickly, amplifying the stimulus effect on consumer demand and local economies. By narrowing eligibility, lawmakers aim to maximize economic impact while controlling overall program costs. Funding mechanisms represent another critical component of the discussion, with tariff-generated revenue frequently referenced as a potential source. The concept involves redirecting a portion of revenue collected from tariffs back into the domestic economy through structured rebates or stimulus-style payments. This approach allows policymakers to position the program as partially self-funded, reducing reliance on additional federal borrowing at a time when debt sustainability remains a major concern. While tariff revenue alone may not cover the full cost of such a distribution, it could play a meaningful supporting role within a broader fiscal framework. Notably, this proposal is not being framed as emergency relief tied to an acute crisis. Instead, it is positioned as a stabilization measure, intended to support household spending amid economic uncertainty or slowing growth. This framing influences both the scale of the payment and the decision to limit eligibility, as policymakers seek to provide support without introducing excessive inflationary pressure. Administrative feasibility also factors heavily into the proposal's design. Existing IRS and Treasury systems already contain income data necessary to determine eligibility, allowing for efficient implementation without the need for new application infrastructure. This reduces administrative delays, limits errors, and increases the likelihood of timely distribution if the program is authorized. Taken together, the proposed $2,000 stimulus for 2026 signals a more disciplined approach to direct financial intervention. By emphasizing targeted eligibility, defined funding sources, and operational efficiency, policymakers appear focused on delivering measurable economic support while avoiding the scale and fiscal strain of past stimulus programs. Whether this proposal advances will depend on economic conditions and legislative alignment, but its structure reflects a clear evolution in how direct payments are being considered. At present, the proposed $2,000 stimulus payment for 2026 remains a policy concept rather than a legislative reality. No formal bill has been introduced or passed through Congress, which means there is currently no legal framework guaranteeing such a payment. While public remarks and ongoing discussions have elevated expectations, these signals should not be mistaken for finalized policy. Until a proposal advances through the legislative process, including drafting, committee review, congressional approval, and executive authorization, the idea remains provisional. Discussions surrounding the potential timeline consistently point toward mid to late 2026, rather than the beginning of the year. This projected window reflects both procedural and strategic considerations. Large-scale fiscal measures require extensive coordination across government agencies, budget offices, and regulatory bodies. Even under accelerated conditions, the infrastructure needed to authorize and distribute direct payments cannot be deployed immediately. A later timeline allows lawmakers to evaluate economic data trends, fiscal capacity, and public response before committing to implementation. The 2026 midterm elections represent a critical factor, influencing the pace and visibility of these discussions. Election cycles historically shape fiscal policy decisions, particularly when proposed measures offer direct financial relief to voters. A targeted stimulus payment aligns with this dynamic by addressing economic pressures faced by specific income groups while remaining politically resonant. As a result, the proposal gains heightened attention as the election approaches, increasing its strategic value within broader policy debates. Political timing alone does not ensure legislative success. Budgetary limitations, inflationary concerns, and partisan disagreements remain significant obstacles. Lawmakers must weigh the potential economic benefits of direct payments against long-term fiscal responsibility. These constraints introduce uncertainty, even in periods where political incentives are strong. Economic conditions will ultimately play a decisive role in determining whether the proposal advances. If indicators such as consumer spending, employment trends, or overall growth show sustained weakness, the argument for targeted stimulus becomes more compelling. Conversely, signs of economic stabilization could reduce urgency, shifting focus toward other policy priorities. In essence, while momentum around a $2,000 stimulus payment for 2026 continues to build, it is shaped by a convergence of legislative readiness, economic necessity, and electoral timing. The absence of enacted legislation underscores the proposal's uncertain status, while the mid to late 2026 timeline reflects deliberate pacing rather than delay. Whether this concept evolves into actionable policy will depend on how these forces align in the months ahead, making the outcome far from settled, but increasingly consequential. The proposed $2,000 stimulus for 2026 is being discussed as a targeted financial distribution rather than a universal payout, aimed at supporting households most likely to experience economic pressure. Eligibility is expected to be income-based, prioritizing low and middle-income families to maximize impact on consumer spending. Policymakers have highlighted tariff-generated revenue as a potential funding mechanism, offering a way to finance payments without significantly increasing government debt. At present, no formal legislation has been passed, making the proposal conceptual rather than guaranteed. Current discussions consistently point to mid to late 2026 for potential distribution, allowing time for economic assessments and administrative preparation. The 2026 midterm elections are a key political factor, as historically election cycles influence fiscal policy and direct payments can resonate with voters, providing both economic and political incentive for lawmakers. Unlike pandemic-era stimulus, this proposal is not tied to emergency lockdowns or abrupt economic shocks. Instead, it is designed as a preventive stabilizer, responding to broader economic trends. Indicators such as slowing growth, weak consumer spending, or rising unemployment could accelerate approval, creating conditions where targeted financial support becomes necessary to sustain economic activity. If approved, distribution would likely utilize existing IRS and Treasury systems, allowing rapid delivery through direct deposit, mailed checks, or prepaid debit cards. Leveraging these systems ensures efficiency, minimizes administrative overhead, and reduces the risk of errors, enabling households to receive support quickly if economic conditions warrant intervention. The proposed $2,000 stimulus for 2026 is being discussed as a targeted financial distribution, designed to provide support to households most likely to need it, rather than a universal payout. Eligibility is expected to be income-based, prioritizing low and middle-income households who are likely to spend the payment immediately, amplifying its economic impact. Policymakers have referenced tariff-generated revenue as a potential funding mechanism, allowing part of the distribution to be financed without significantly increasing national debt. No formal legislation has been passed yet, so the proposal remains conceptual rather than guaranteed. Timing discussions point toward mid to late 2026, aligning with both procedural realities and potential political considerations. The 2026 midterm elections are a significant factor, as lawmakers often consider policies that provide direct, tangible benefits to voters during election cycles. However, final approval will depend on legislative consensus, budget feasibility, and broader economic conditions. Unlike pandemic-era stimulus, this proposal is not tied to emergency lockdowns. Instead, it is designed to respond to economic signals such as slowing growth, weak consumer spending, or rising unemployment, which could accelerate its approval. If implemented, distribution would likely leverage existing IRS and Treasury systems, enabling faster and more accurate payments through direct deposit or mailed checks. Fixed income recipients, including Social Security beneficiaries and retirees, would be included based on income thresholds, not the type of benefits they receive. Current discussions suggest income caps of approximately $75,000 for individuals and $150,000 for couples, though these numbers could be adjusted depending on final legislation. The proposal is framed as a one-time stimulus or rebate, rather than a recurring payment program, emphasizing temporary economic support rather than long-term entitlement. Lawmakers view the proposed $2,000 stimulus for 2026 as a short-term economic stabilizer, designed to provide immediate liquidity to households most likely to spend it quickly. Unlike permanent programs or structural economic reforms, one-time payments are intended to mitigate temporary economic slowdowns, boosting consumer demand and supporting short-term growth without committing to long-term fiscal obligations. A key constraint on any stimulus is inflation risk. Injecting cash into the economy can increase spending, which, if uncoordinated with supply and demand, could further elevate prices. As a result, policymakers are carefully considering both the size and scope of any payout to maximize economic support while limiting inflationary pressures. This balance ensures that stimulus measures reinforce stability rather than exacerbate existing economic challenges. Final approval of the payment depends on a combination of economic indicators, political consensus, and fiscal feasibility. Lawmakers will assess metrics such as GDP growth, unemployment rates, and consumer spending to determine the urgency and potential impact of the stimulus. Political alignment is critical, as divided legislative bodies must reach consensus on both funding sources and eligibility criteria. Fiscal feasibility is also a determining factor, requiring that any payout be consistent with broader budgetary constraints and long-term debt considerations. The targeting of recipients is designed to maximize economic impact. Funds are directed toward households with the highest propensity to spend, amplifying the multiplier effect and ensuring that stimulus dollars circulate quickly through the economy. This approach requires precise income thresholds and efficient distribution mechanisms to deliver support to eligible recipients without unnecessary delays or administrative complications. The 2026 stimulus proposal represents a calibrated economic intervention aiming to stabilize the economy during periods of uncertainty. It reflects a strategic balance between urgency, efficiency, and fiscal responsibility, rather than a blanket policy or permanent entitlement. Its potential approval will depend on the intersection of economic conditions, political dynamics, and budgetary planning, making the timing and execution as critical as the payment itself. As 2026 unfolds, all eyes remain on the potential $2,000 stimulus, an economic tool that could reshape household finances and consumer confidence alike. While timing, eligibility, and approval are still uncertain, the discussion highlights how targeted policy can influence both markets and everyday lives. Whether it arrives or not, understanding the mechanisms, triggers, and political dynamics behind this proposal is essential. Stay informed, stay prepared, and watch closely as this story develops. It could redefine the financial landscape for millions.